right?
Yes, but we are now live.
Okay.
So sorry, I should have said that.
That's good. I saw.
Yes,
I
did do Jazz Pels. Yeah, our usual polished intro here. How about just the level of polish on this live stream? What would be your reaction to that?
Let's see.
Yeah, we always prepare for these face things too.
The Clippers defense tonight. Me seeing a section of our podcast plan that I'm not supposed to read.
Yeah, I maybe you can read it. We'll see what happens when we get there. We may not even get to that tonight, actually.
Yeah. It caught my eye and then didn't catch my eye.
Yeah, well, no, I had this idea on the Wolves that I was going to do 10 surprising stats about the Wolves and kind of like true false you with it, but then I ran out of steam and I decided to look at Rudy Gobert's defense this year instead. But okay. I had like a couple of those in there at least. So
cool.
We'll get there when we get there. All right, let's do a podcast. Welcome on to a Sunday night edition. 15 and 60. May not get to all 15 tonight. We shall see how far we get, because we're even going to do an Eastern Conference team, because I watched an Eastern Conference team last night, and so this is my show, and I got some observations on said Eastern Conference team, the Washington Wizards. So is that a great way to plug the show here? All right, where are we going to start though here, Danny? Maybe with the just concluded Lakers-Clippers game?
Yeah, I think that is where we should start. They played at the Intuit Dome, but I'll start with the Lakers stats. They, after this loss, are 22-18, and that's 3-4 since the last 15-60. Per Cleaning the Glass, their net rating is negative 1.9, which is 20th in the NBA. They are 13th in offense, 23rd in defense, and ESPN's BPI projects them to win 45 games, which is the 7th seed in the West, and still gives them a respectable 78% chance of making the playoffs.
Yeah, and per our last report from Seth Partnow, whose clutch numbers account for where a team is when they enter the clutch, the Lakers actually are not really winning that many clutch games. Their
Interesting.
Net rating, you would have thought they'd be crazy in that. They're actually 10-9 in clutch games. Now, they've actually won 0.2 fewer games than expected there. So really, they haven't benefited much from the clutch. It's just that their quote-unquote blowout wins have been of a far smaller magnitude than their blowout losses, which that does matter. It does have some predictive power.
And while we're on that front, I think this is part of why you went down that direction. The Lakers, the way Clean the Glass does it is basically they project out the differential that you have on an 82-game season, and then they look at how that compares. The Lakers are outperforming their point differential by the most in the NBA. They're plus 4.3 now after the loss on Sunday. That is ahead of the Blazers, who are plus 4.
Yeah, normally that would be due to a clutch overperformance, but not the case, which is pretty rare, I would say. So, yeah, let's talk about this game against the Clippers, and we'll be bouncing back and forth. Clippers, for their part, now 24-17, 5-2 in their last 7. They are 9th in the NBA net rating with plus 2.9, 22nd on offense, but now a robust 2nd on defense. And BPI likes them for 48 wins. 5th seed, 95% chance of making the playoffs. Ooh, okay. I mean, my number one takeaway, Danny, and I saw Kawhi Leonard play against the Nets, who did not play at the level of an NBA team that night.
No, they didn't.
The Lakers still are an NBA team. Thought he looked great in this one. Yeah. I really was impressed. 19 points, 9 of 13 from the field as he went up against his 25-minute limit. So he's done basically by the end of the third. So they're kind of playing him in the normal stints. You know, they've kind of dealt with this since the beginning of the 22-23 season. Remember that farcical thing where he like wouldn't even come in until the end of the second, and that was too weird, they decided. So they had him start the game, but then he just can't go back in after midway through the third quarter. But he dominated. He was plus 20.
He did a great job, and I thought that the only thing that looked a little bit weird for Kawhi Leonard was his movement. Like, there were a couple of possessions relatively early in the game I cracked up because he and Max Christie were matched up a fair amount, and Christie was just like running so much faster than Kawhi, but Kawhi was just getting to the spot. It reminded me of
Kawhi can't, like, he hasn't been able to sprint. He's like Chris Paul. He hasn't been able to sprint for like 5 years already, but yet he still gets to where he needs to go.
Exactly. And so he gets to his spots, had a steal relatively early, and had a couple plays where he just was in the right spot. Got a kind of a duck in for a dunk, or for a jumping finish, I guess I should probably say. I don't think it was actually a dunk. And yeah, I think that he, it is a lot of mid-rangers, but he's making them. He's getting to those spots, and the Lakers don't really have anybody who was guarding him particularly well. And there are some guys who maybe could, but didn't, and that's okay.
Yeah. And well, in theory, Dorian Finney-Smith is someone who has experience against him, and
sure.
I don't know that Dorian Finney-Smith wasn't able to stop him when they played 4 years ago in the playoffs, but like that's kind of what he was brought in to do. He's better than anyone the Lakers have had in that spot since like 2021. Shit, Max Christie might be better than anyone they've had in that spot since 2021.
Yeah, that is not exactly
Vanderbilt.
Sure,
maybe, but he can't shoot.
He's unavailable. Yeah. And so
he's also not playing. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that Kawhi, I thought that he played very well, and the plus 20 in his minutes was mostly earned. There were a couple of really bad Lakers offensive stretches during that period of time, and we'll see where his minute restriction, how that evolves over the next couple of months. And I'm thrilled for the Clippers that could potentially be relevant because they've been playing well enough with and without him for that to be the case. Certainly that's a big highlight for me. The other big one.
Well, and let me finish up on him though.
Oh, of course.
I think there was, so, I mean, really just these last two games, he's seemed to kind of have a bounce in his step. He's going through these like, hitting the controller button a bunch of time, dribbling combinations. He had this one play where he went at, I can't remember if it was Christie or Finney-Smith on the right wing in the third quarter. Went between his legs a couple of times, crossover, spin move back left to right, and then he finished with a nice jump hook when he saw Anthony Davis coming over. He pulled up and hit that. The play you were talking about, the Lakers played a lot of zone in the third quarter of this game, and so James Harden was standing up top. Kawhi kind of snuck along the baseline, and Harden threw it up to him high enough that it actually went over Anthony Davis, who was playing center in the zone, to Kawhi along the baseline, and Kawhi was able to like sky up there. He wasn't able to tip it in, but he was able to land and then finish over the front of the rim. Not a dunk, but still, like, that was a pretty athletic play for a guy who's like 34 now. And I thought he was able to get pretty good separation. Like it was like last year, I think people didn't give his season quite the respect that it deserved. But because he was coming off surgery again, had like a little bit of a slow start, but like he was awesome. And it doesn't look so amazing for him because he's just getting to these mid-rangers and making him. But it was, these last two games have been good enough to make me think like, oh, what if this is the year that he's actually healthy in the playoffs? And they had talked about a 5-game ramp-up period for him where it's a preseason yeah, that's right. Kawhi Leonard was going to play 5 games in the preseason, sure. But nonetheless, it's interesting, and really credit Ty Lue and Zubac and Hart, all these, Norm Powell, and all these really good defenders on the Clippers for keeping them in position to where it could actually, like, they might be in that kind of same group of like Houston and Memphis and stuff. Like this is interesting. I don't want to get sucked in again because there's always something with Kawhi, but I will say this compared to like Joel Embiid, when he comes back, like he usually will have a stretch where things go well for a while, and then it takes some sort of an acute injury for him to get hurt again.
Yeah, he comes back and he's okay. It's not like he's playing and you see how limited he is, and then it flares up to the point where he can't. I think that's it's a fair point.
And I think like his strategy of not rushing back, like, yeah, he hasn't played that much, but he has been able to come back and like be pretty close to himself when he actually does play these last few years since the ACL tear. So I thought that was my biggest takeaway. I just wanted to spend a little more time on that. What else did you have in this one?
For me, other than Kawhi, the biggest story of this game was the Clippers defense. You brought up that they have moved up to I believe they're second on cleaning the glass. And I thought they did a fabulous job overall defending the Lakers. And sure, the Lakers missed some threes that they would normally make, but they were able to me, Zubac was the key, former Laker, Ivica Zubac, where I thought he completely outplayed Anthony Davis. And part of that was the job he did on AD Davis until he had one late, but he just wasn't really getting to his spots on his shots in the paint. And Zubac was there, but also Zubac contesting everything else. And something that we've talked about, it was a point that you and I discussed in terms of his All-NBA, or not All-NBA, Defensive Player of the Year viability, was that opponents don't shoot a lot in the restricted area when Ivica Zubac is on the floor. And I thought you really did see some of the reasons for that in this game. And overall, the Lakers shot 23, but I don't think all of those were while he was in the game. The Clippers went to a different, I want to talk about their backup center stuff, but I thought that Zubac did a really good job defensively. And then offensively, I thought it was more opportunistic and fine. He had 21 points, also had 19 rebounds, was just short of his second 2020 game of the week because he had one on Monday against Miami. And I'm thankful Ty Lue didn't keep him in to get that extra rebound. But Zubac, I thought so the defensive end was great, but briefly before we got to just want to make sure I mentioned it because I forget otherwise, he also had an important stretch. So one of the parts of the story of this game is that the Clippers were just completely dominating the Lakers. And then they were up, I want to say it was something like 80 to, they were up like 25 points. And then the Lakers went on this pretty aggressive run. But what helped, and the Clippers offense was bad during that, but what helped stanch the bleeding was Zubac got a couple of post-ups on Jackson Hayes and just completely put him in the goal. And that got the Clippers enough traction that they could hold the lead enough that it was never really scary.
Yeah, he's been their third guy in terms of running him into the post, and he can get deep post position, get to that right-handed hook all season. And going back to his defense, I thought Anthony Davis just was not interested in trying. There's a lot of plays in which the Lakers will get Davis the ball near the free throw line, and Zubac is on him, and Davis just went for the jumper. He was 5 of 14, and he only took this is listing him as having taken 0 shots in the restricted area, and looking at the plot, there's really only 2 that are right on the line. Everything else was dotted line or further out for Davis. And if Davis can't, he's waxes and wanes on that mid-range shooting, but what he does is he makes plays at the basket. And so to not even get, a roll to the basket or something for a dunk or an offensive rebound at any point in the game, that is really, really good defense. And it shows you that deterrent effect that you alluded to.
And one of the other ways that Zubac helps his team, and it was very pronounced on Sunday, is helping them win the possession game. So Zubac had 8 individually credited offensive rebounds. The Lakers had 5. And overall, there was a 6 rebound difference. And then turnovers was closer to even, but the Lakers had the disadvantage there too. They had 15 versus 12 for the Clippers. And notably, 12 of the Lakers' 15 turnovers were Clippers steals, and that helped them really get their offense going.
Yeah, Clippers defense is very legitimate, and just the activity level of someone like Chris Dunn, who only played 12 minutes, but he came in and guarded LeBron, for example, and Amir Coffey is another guy who's just having a nice season, just a totally rock solid player. Batum comes in and gives them some energy. They only went with Mo Bamba in the first half, and Derek Jones Jr. is another guy who just gives them a ton at that small forward position. And then you throw in Kawhi as well, who's really starting at power forward these days. And Kawhi guarded LeBron. I thought he was pretty good on LeBron. LeBron started playing better once Kawhi went out, but Kawhi was doing a really good job of directing the ball, not letting LeBron use screens. And so what that did, that played a big part in how Davis wasn't really able to get going in the pick and roll because they're forcing everything towards the baseline. And then, you can hit Davis coming down the lane, but Zubac is able to still be between him and the basket in that circumstance. And then Davis has to kind of pull up for a floater or or catch the ball. Zubac gets out to him and he'd do like a jab step jumper. So I thought Kawhi was pretty solid on LeBron, and LeBron for his part, really good passing game with 11
Yeah.
assists. Like he got Rui Hachimura going along the baseline a couple of times for dunks when he was able to turn the corner in semi-transition. But I thought the Lakers overall, partly because of the Clippers, but partly just because they were moving in cement, just very station to station on their offense. You didn't see much ball movement. Every time they would change sides of the floor, it would just take 2 seconds for the next guy to come open and everyone to remember what they're supposed to do. And that allowed the Clippers to really just load up on any of these actions from LA.
Another telling stat for me in this game, which is some about Austin Reeves and some about the Clippers, is that Austin Reeves, 6 field goal attempts. He did have 4 free throw attempts, but that's not that many, and 5 turnovers. And so for him, just
and he got beat up again in the first half on his own defensive end too, which is becoming a theme. And I don't know whether that's had to do with his reduced offensive output in this game, but that's a problem the Lakers are going to have to deal with, because they will switch anything. They'll switch Reeves on anybody, they'll switch Connect on anybody, and that puts them in a tough position.
It can. And the Clippers have, with Harden and Powell and Kawhi in the lineup, I think they should actually stagger those guys a little bit more. I thought that Kevin Porter Jr., he used to have to do too much because they didn't have enough guys. Now I think he's doing too much because Ty Lue needs to tweak things a little bit. But they have a lot of different threats. And so you talked about how they'll switch anybody on anyways. There are a lot of players who the Clippers had guys who could exploit those sorts of things. And I thought they did a nice job getting those players the ball. Powell, 17 shots, Harden, 19 shots, Kawhi, 13 in 24 minutes. And so, you want those guys to have the lion's share. And there are a lot of broadcasts, you and I watch a ton of League Pass, that fixate on bench scoring. And I think that the Clippers are a great example of why bench scoring doesn't actually matter that much, because the Clippers have starters who score and they have bench guys who do other things. Like Nick Batum was very disruptive defensively. I got a couple of nice tap boys. He hit some opportunistic threes too, but there's a different way that you can do it. And when you have a big 3 offensive players, and you could add Zubac to that totally fairly, you don't need those guys to generate shots.
No, that's true. And if Kawhi is really going to be able to come back and play 30 minutes for these guys, this rotation falls into place much more easily, because Harden had to play 40 minutes in this one. The Clippers were up 26 mid-third, and then the Lakers came back. Actually, when they went to a 2 big lineup and Kawhi went out, the Clippers scored 2 points over maybe a 4 or 5 minute period. Lakers went on a 15-2 run to cut the lead in half, but never, I think, got it within 10, and ended up being a 14-point Clipper win in the end. And let's see if there's anything else that sticks out to me. Not particularly. I the double big thing that JJ Redick said they're going to do a little bit more of that. They didn't do it a ton, but I thought it did work, particularly when the Clippers just didn't have Kawhi out there. And Harden, I don't think it's going to work for him in the playoffs. He'll have some big games on occasion. He's 4 of 9 from 3 in this one. He still is a great passer with 12 assists. He threw some absolute dimes, but his ability to just score against good defense, or even to score from 2-point range out of the pick and roll, even if you're playing it 2-on-2, now he'll find Zubac and cause you problems that way. But if you can just not let him get the ball to the big and force him to be a 2-point scorer, he's 3 of 10 from 2 in this one. I don't think he can be particularly effective there. So I think even with Kawhi back, even if you want to just pencil Kawhi in of being at his best the way he was last regular season, or even before he got hurt in 23 against the Suns, even if you want to pencil that in, I still think they don't have enough offensively.
I don't think they do either, but they're in such a better position than I expected. I mean, something I thought about during this game is that we were so excited by that OKC swap, right? Which does still matter. So basically OKC can swap their pick with either the Clippers pick or the Rockets pick. Both of those selections are significantly worse than we thought they might be at the start of the year.
Yeah. I thought that would be, at least one of those would be a lottery pick. The chance of both those teams making the playoffs was very low to me. And we highlighted how they were playing swapper bowl 3. Rockets are 3-0 in those games, by the way. to determine who would get swapped with. But yeah, I mean, I think both those teams are looking pretty good right now. Now, of course, it could all come crashing down. I mean, the one thing you could say about the Clippers is like Zubac, Powell had one. I can't remember what his injury was. Maybe it was like a hamstring or calf or something. Zubac, Harden, Powell, those guys have played, and that's been really helpful for them because that you can't say that about a lot of teams. Let's go to what took place last night. A slight downgrade in quality, I would say, to Warriors Wizards. Warriors have a ton of injuries, and why don't you give their stats before we move on?
The Warriors are 21-20 on the season, 4-4 since the last 15-60. They are now below water in net rating. Negative 0.2 is 16th in the league. They were having all these blowout wins at the start of the year. Still 8th on defense, but 21st on offense. BPI projects them to win 41 games, which would be the 8th seed. I believe right now BPI has a pretty big gap between 7 and 8. We'll see how that bears out over time, and gives the Warriors only a 29% chance of making the playoffs.
Yeah, so despite them being projected as the 8th seed, there are just a lot of teams right in that range. That's why that number is as low as it is. And Draymond Green has been dealing with this back stuff, and then plays 3 minutes. I think it was after he went for a hook shot over Alex Sarr early in the game, was limping, had to leave the game. He returned to the bench later, and like he was really struggling to move even at that point. So and he's not going to play on their Monday showdown on Martin Luther King Day against the Celtics.
And on that front, it's notable that the Warriors said that they were going to do an MRI on Draymond Green's calf on Sunday. They did the MRI. They ruled him out, but they did not reveal what the injury is or the severity. So I don't know what that deal is. That's a little bit bizarre. But as you mentioned, like they've been having a lot of absences, and they actually, because Draymond has been so weird and bad offensively this year, I think that part of it could actually be really interesting for the Warriors. It would be more compelling if Jonathan Kuminga were available, but he's still dealing with this bad ankle sprain. The question is, can they deal with his absence? Should it be an extended one? We don't know that. Defensively, and they were able to do good enough against the Wizards. I mean, they won that to me, watching it a little bit on the side, it was more of an offensive win than a defensive one, but they were able to win.
Yeah, it didn't up until the second half. They actually were struggling quite a bit offensively and were just hitting threes. Both teams really struggled from two for most of the game. Ultimately, Washington was 39% from two. Golden State played a lot better. Steph Curry actually had one of his best driving games. Steph ended up 6 of 8 from two and had 26 points, even though the three ball was off at 4 of 14. Where I want to start, though, actually discussing this one, or actually one more thing on Draymond, too. Anything with the calf is concerning with him. I mean, number one, just having to leave the game with a calf issue. If it is a muscle strain, that's going to almost certainly going to be a 2-weeker, given the way that he was moving. And 2-weeker at this point, you're starting to look at the All-Star break. But also, he had calf issues, at least that was initially what it was diagnosed as back in 22, and he had this back issue. He's been dealing with lower back stuff these last couple of days. They had said, it's not as bad as in 22, but then, and because remember, he missed like 2.5 months in 22.
Mm-hmm.
And so what ended up, what I'm concerned about is that, this could be related to the back, and this could be an extended absence from that. So in any event, I want to talk about Alex Sarr first. I thought he's made some strides. That's what Brian Keefe, who is the current NBA coach king of the Anodyne quote, he cut his teeth in OKC. Big surprise there. Although Mark Daigneault is a much more interesting coach than some of the guys that we've had. Billy Donovan was interesting too, but he was also the king of saying a lot of stuff and appearing like he was really being intellectual and then not actually saying anything. That's continued in Chicago. But I thought Sarr really was not very effective offensively inside the arc. Was 1 out of 3 there. And when he caught it on the pick and roll, it didn't look amazing still. If he just doesn't have a great awareness for where the defense is. His hands aren't great, so he has to kind of really focus in on catching the ball, and then he doesn't have like a great understanding of where the defense is as he's catching it. And there was one play where he got it on the short roll near the dotted line. Seemed like he had an opening and somehow turned it into a fading hook shot over Kevon Looney. But he was 3 of 7 from downtown. Wizards actually were 22 of 45, which is how they managed to have an acceptable offense despite shooting 39% from 2 in the game. But I thought defensively he showed more than I'd seen from him. It helped that this is a matchup that was not a particularly physical one. The last time I saw him in person was in Washington against Detroit, and he really got beat up by Beef Stew and Jalen Duren, who are really like just extremely physical players. And Kevon Looney's physical, but he doesn't have that level of athleticism. He's not going to just like knock you out of the way and score necessarily. And I thought Sarr's pick and roll defense was pretty solid in this one. There are a few times maybe when he didn't get out on Steph Curry, but I thought he did a good job of staying on the axis between the ball handler and the roll man and not overreacting to the ball, which is what a lot of young bigs will do, not giving up plays that went right to the rim from the big. Trace Jackson Davis had a pretty miserable finishing game in this one. Sarr was a pretty big part of that. So and his mobility is pretty solid. He's starting to play a little bit harder. Didn't love his defensive rebounding, but it was better than it has been at times this year. And the 3 ball has started to go down for him as well. So this is, compared to the last time I saw him, this was a step forward for him, I would say.
That's great. And for Sarr, what I've been impressed with, I think that his positioning for a player as young as he is, because remember, it's not even just that Sarr is a rookie; it's that he's a pretty young rookie. He's 19 right now. He'll turn 20 in April, so the Wizards season will be done by that point. But he kind of knows where to be, I think, better than most guys his age. And also, I think his feet are pretty good. They're not like the best I've ever seen for a young big, but pretty good. And when you put those things together, it's a nice foundation, especially when you put in his measurements. And so, like you, I'm far more confident in Sarr's defense than his offense. And like I brought this up last, I think it was a 1560 or maybe it was 2 ago. Like he just gets very few good opportunities inside the arc, whether it's transition or everything else. Some of that, especially with Malcolm Brogdon out, is just the lack of high-level passers on his team. But part of it is that Sarr also doesn't work his way into good position often enough.
Yeah, and he's not really strong enough to do that either. And there are moments where he kind of doesn't know what he's doing as well. But I think his instincts have gotten better in a conventional pick and roll defense. That's the one time that he tried to push the ball up. Like he made a great play to get a stop at the rim, got the rebound, pushed it up, and then tried to throw a bounce pass into the corner to Corey Kispert that was probably like 5 feet away from him and just went over the baseline. It's pretty ugly. But Jordan Poole, 36 minutes, 38 points, 12 of 25 from the field, 8 of 15 from 3 in his return, had 5 assists. And certainly in the first half when he was really going off, was having a nice little revenge game, just bombing some threes. And it was a common refrain just in some of the conversations I was having around the arena that, hey, they could kind of use this version of Jordan Poole right now. He would easily be their second best offensive player. Dennis Schroeder, who we'll get to in a second, is not been able to give them what Jordan Poole did. And hilariously, Jordan Poole is a pretty good fit with Draymond. Poole's playing more point guard for the Wizards. But most of what he was doing was just working off the handoff game, kind of some of the same stuff. Like he wasn't really running straight pick and roll. It was more just finding opportunities off the ball and bombing threes, some pretty deep ones as well. In the fourth quarter, though, things kind of broke down for him. You saw a few of these plays that you would see in the last couple of years from him where he would just try to go into some big dribbling moves. He just like can't beat anybody one-on-one. And so he would just try to beat the guy, not physical enough to turn the corner, probably fall down. There's a few of those sorts of plays, ugly turnovers in traffic. He also had some pretty slick moves. Like there was one where he got down the lane, had a beautiful pass fake to the corner and laid it in. So it definitely just was dynamic, fast paced, just, kind of what they haven't had in their offense since he left. So I think he is back on track towards being the player it looked like he could be in Golden State. At least the year before he left. I mean, last year was just so comical. And then when Brian Keefe came in, he started playing better. It was very under the radar because he was so bad under Wes Unseld. And then this year he's been like a pretty quality option, really the only one they have.
Dennis Schroeder had a fascinating game. He took 4 3-pointers in the first 4 minutes and 40 seconds and then took 0 in the rest of the game. And that was not because he went out with injury. He played 32 minutes and just never took another 3-pointer. But he's had some real efficiency problems over the last little bit. But he was 50% from the field, 20 points on 16 shooting possessions. So that's better than it's been most recent games.
Yeah, and I was noting that they take Steph out of the game. Schroeder brings the ball up. And they got a pretty good shooting unit out there with them, which I think they've started to do a better job of. It was Wiggins, Schroeder, Hield, Moses Moody, and then Trace Jackson Davis as the roll man. And so what do? They throw it into the post to Trace Jackson Davis and run a split cut action. Oh, run that for Buddy Hield maybe, or maybe Moses Moody. Maybe even Andrew Wiggins is shooting the 3-ball well. No, they run the split cut action for Schroeder. It's the worst shooter, and certainly not a movement shooter, a guy who shoots a set shot. It takes forever to load up. But then they started doing more double screen stuff for him. And in the third quarter, he started playing better. Hit a couple of tough mid-rangers as well. But this is one of his better games. He did have a couple of plays where he was able to accelerate, get to that corner of the backboard on the right side and finish. And the Wizards, for a young team, that's one of the biggest things that stands out to me when I watch young teams compared to veteran teams is just, and particularly against the Warriors, who have a lot of guys who do certain things that I'm very familiar with, of course, having watched them so much, that, they just didn't force Dennis Schroeder left every single time the way like a lot of teams have effectively done. And Andrew Wiggins, although they can be forgiven for not knowing that he loves a left to right spin move, because really when he was the primary option in Minnesota is when he was doing that. And that was, when these guys were all in middle school for the Wizards, basically. But he went to that move like older. 2 or 3 times. Like that was one where Sarr, I thought, didn't defend him very well and didn't even get a contest and got completely lost on that spin move. Other than that, I thought Sarr was pretty good at contesting until some of these Steph drives late. Yeah.
Since you were there in person, have you seen the funny moment that happened during the game, but it was caught by TV, where Gary Payton II untied friend, presumably former teammate Jordan Poole's shoes, and then told the ref that Poole was going to complain and lie about it? It's a pretty funny moment.
No, I didn't see that. I did see that Poole and Payton were engaged throughout the game. They put Gary Payton in to guard Poole down the end, and that was important to get that. And also, like, Gary Payton is like easily their best screener at this point because he's really quick. And then he rolls out of there fast and can make a decision or finish. And it seems like every time he sets a screen for Steph, something good happens. A lot of it's because he's being guarded by a big. You go back to like the 23 playoffs when they tried to put Anthony Davis on him, and in the first half of that game 4, the Payton Steph or Steph Payton pick and roll really torched the Lakers, and they had to go in a different direction. But yeah, back to Wiggins. Like, he's doing everything that could possibly be asked for him offensively. 31 points in this one, 12 of 22 from the field. And he really hurt the Wizards a lot from the short mid-range area with little hook shots. When things got a little gnarly, they would run post-ups for him. He would go right through whoever was guarding. And a lot of times that was a smart player because they put Bilal Coulibaly on Steph Curry. And I thought Bilal did okay, but I also just didn't really feel him in any way defensively. And then on offense, his shot was all kinds of messed up. 0-4, just 34 minutes, but was not really involved. Did have 7 assists, but I didn't think not a ton of them really stood out. So some reporter asked Brian Keefe about it afterwards, and I was like, wait, he had 7 assists? It was one of those 7 assist games as opposed to like, oh, he's really racking these up. A little bit more on the Wizards. Jonas Valanciunas, if I ever have a few spare hours, I want to just get he and Rudy Gobert in an empty gym together and have him do a point blank tip in contest to 1. See who gets there first. I'll bring a book.
The Heat Death of the Universe.
Yeah, I liked what I saw from Bub Carrington in this game. He had 17 points. Most of that came from 4-6 from 3, but he was really bombing it. He gets off the ground on those two. The mechanics of his shot have actually translated really well. I'm sure he's worked on it too for a guy who was a big mid-range scorer in college. And that part of his game was there a little bit. He hit one really tough mid-range. He had another 3 right at the end of the clock, like going left, where he had to kind of kick his left leg forward. But he's getting good rise on those. And then he's not a great defensive player yet. He doesn't have a lot of strength. But I was impressed with a few moments of him moving his feet and how quickly he could cover ground. So he hasn't been great this year. Obviously, he's 51% true shooting. He never gets to the foul line, all this stuff. But I thought, again, I had a few flashes, like building blocks were there for him in this game. Didn't think we'd be talking about this that much, but hey, I was there. Yeah. I might as well tell you everything I saw, right?
And one of the other things that interests me about Carrington, going back to Draft Scout and all that, is I thought that he has, like, he'd be a little bit small for 2, but I think he can guard 2s if depending on who you pair him with, and that could end up being useful for the Wizards as they move forward.
Couple other little smaller notes. Guy Santos, who was a big hero of their win in Detroit, hit some threes, made some hustle plays. Without Draymond, he started the second half, but quickly was nailed to the bench the rest of the way. Only played 8 minutes. He's very fast in a straight line because he just sprints really hard, but he can't really move laterally and he can't jump. And so other than like running down loose balls and making open threes, which I don't even know if he can do that. He just did that in that one Detroit game. He's not as useful. Like playing him, he's like 6'6". Like he's not really athletic enough to play power forward. So it looks like that job, hilariously, is probably going to go to Moses Moody for now. And he had another pretty efficient scoring game. I think this is the most minutes he's ever played in back-to-back games, including the Minnesota game where Draymond was out. Kyle Anderson is also out with what they're now calling left glute bursitis.
Mm-hmm.
And so Moody, I've always kind of wondered, like I thought actually his moving his feet looked good, pressuring up the ball in this game. We haven't really seen him guard smaller players much, and they've brought in Schroeder to start now next to Steph. I do kind of wonder what it would look like playing him at the 2, because he does have good size. Like
I've wondered about that too.
Could do some sort, like he is a natural 2, I would say. Like he's not really big enough to be a 3, but he plays physically. He had some really nice finishes at the basket where he just took off of 2 feet, went through the guy's chest, and was able to double pump it and bank it in. And his shot is reliable. He's up to 33 or 39% from downtown this year. I've always felt like he was going to make shots if he had enough of a sample. He sped up his release a little bit, but he just is someone who, like, he can do something when he gets the ball. The Warriors just somehow like don't have enough of those guys. That includes Trace Jackson-Davis, who I thought just had a really bad finishing game in this one. And Kyle Kuzma somehow ended up with 22 points. He went on like this big run early in the fourth after not score. I don't think he even scored in the first half and played 14 minutes, but ended up a team worst -17. And he had this quote after the game. He was asked, "Oh, how's Jordan Poole doing playing for you?" He's like, "Oh, he's like me. He's a rhythm player. He needs to have the ball in his hands a lot." I'm like, "Oh, Kyle, like you still don't know what you actually are. Like he's just so perfect for sopping up possessions on this Wizards team." But I really would like to see more of Bub Carrington on the ball than we've seen so far.
It's been a frustration of mine, and with Malcolm Brogdon out, it's another opportunity that they could use to have him as like the ball dominant backup point guard. And I don't think we saw it in this one. I don't think we've seen it nearly enough.
All right. I think that's about all we need here. I mean, watching was up for much of this game. Warriors came back and won it in the end. Kevon Looney got the close for them. And for, again, an inexperienced team like the Wizards, like they probably weren't disrespecting him enough offensively. Although he did have 5 offensive rebounds, 10 points. I wonder if that's even a season high for him. Anyway, that was a lot there. Let's move on to where exactly?
Oklahoma City.
35-7. They did lose in this game without Shea against Dallas that we're going to talk about momentarily, but 6-2 since we last checked in on them. Of course, they lost to Cleveland last week and then blew them out in the game we talked about Thursday. They not only have the best net rating in the NBA at plus 13.9, which is number one by quite a bit. They're sixth on offense now. Remember, they started off really poorly, shooting terribly, up to sixth. And then, of course, their defense, like 3 points per 100 better than anybody else. And yeah, BPI likes them for 65 wins. I don't think they're going to get there just because we're going to see a lot more rest days. Although if I were them, I would at least try to be the number one overall seed. They should be thinking finals, I would say. And Jalen Williams had a right hip strain, didn't play today against the Nets. I haven't looked at it yet. I assume that they absolutely throttled them, and they did, 127-101.
And this is J-Dub, Jalen Williams.
Yes. And then Shea missed that game due to right wrist soreness on Friday against the Mavs. That was the second night of a back-to-back as well. And then Chet Holmgren with that iliac hip fracture that's like right on the tip of your hip, basically. He's progressing his recovery. He'll be reevaluated in 3 to 5 weeks. I would imagine that would be the point at which he would be potentially returning to practice. Hopefully not something that's going to cause complications. Usually fractures like this don't. So what did you see in this Dallas OKC game Friday, Danny?
So obviously you're excited every time Dallas and OKC play each other. And it did lose some steam with both Luka, of course, out with this calf strain and Shea out with right wrist soreness. But part of why I wanted to watch this game anyway, because I knew Shea was out before I watched it, was to see how the Thunder offense flowed without him for a full game. While Jalen Williams is now hurt, J-Dub, he did play on Friday. And what stuck out to me from that perspective, and there's a lot of praise, I'm going to give a lot of praise to Dallas's defense, but the combination of the two, the Thunder got so few easy or clean shots, honestly, either in half court or in transition. And the play that stuck out to me in that, which I think was like the most memorable play of this entire game, was that Alex Caruso gets a steal on Dallas at, I want to say it was around the 3-point line, kind of like elbow extended. And he's moving down the court. It's not that Najee Marshall got like a chase down block or something like that. Najee Marshall busted his ass back so fast that he was in position to stop the drive. It was incredible. And so Dallas's transition defense was spectacular. They didn't earn all of OKC somehow only having 0.22 points per transition play. Like, that is completely ludicrous. No one does that. That's 0th percentile on the year. But Dallas, it was a through line that we talked about a lot in their second round series last year. Dallas gets back. They're shorthanded. They got back. Their defense was fabulous.
Yeah, and that's OKC's transition, particularly with the turnovers that they force, is one of their biggest things.
But Dallas also, and Kyrie deserves a lot of credit for this. I thought Kyrie, so they didn't blitz him quite as much as OKC does in the past. Maybe that's in part because they were a little bit shorthanded. They didn't have all their guys to execute their scheme.
I mean, no, because let's remember too. Obviously, no Chet, but no Hartenstein either. So
correct.
I think they felt like they. I think Jay Will is not someone that they trust to do that as much. And then if they're going with the small group, no Shea either, who can also be a force on the back line. I think they just were more thinking they wanted to stay solid in this one.
They were.
They couldn't necessarily have their cake and eat it too, the way they often have.
And so in a rare occurrence, the Thunder actually gave up more assists than they had, or steals than they had themselves. It was 11 steals for Dallas, 7 for OKC. So that helped short circuit some of their runs. But I thought Dallas did a fantastic job overall, getting back, being in position. And what was so amazing about it was I thought their rim defense for Dallas was really good. And that's more striking because Derek Lively is still missing time. Thankfully, it appears that he sprained his ankle about a week ago. And for the second time this month, Jason Kidd acted like it was pretty serious. And thankfully, it appears that it is not. He might be back Monday against the Rockets, against the Hornets. We don't know exactly when. So that's good, but he didn't play on Friday. And so you're like, okay, Dallas did a good job protecting the rim. Daniel Gafford only played 20 minutes, in part because he turned the ball over 5 times and committed 5 fouls in 20 minutes. But he did well protecting the rim. That was the thing that went well. He didn't foul. But then Dwight Powell only played 5 minutes, and then he got he strained his right hip, and so he's not playing Monday. And so they were going small. Kleba played some 5. They went with some of these other lineups, and I thought that part of it was OKC not having their dudes and not being able to get downhill, but also part of it was Dallas just doing a really good job helping off the right players. And it was so fascinating to see these teams play each other with so many important guys missing, because a lot of the general tenets of like leaving the right guys open, all that stuff that Jason Kidd did last year, those held to form, even though the players for both teams were so different.
One guy who was the same, though, was Lou Dort, 6 of 8 on threes, 0 of 2 on twos. He's shooting actually better on threes, 42.7%, than he is on twos, 41%. And I think we just, at this point, need to conclude that Lou Dort's shooting is real. I know he kind of shoots this moon ball, and he came in as a total non-shooter. And although maybe his most memorable moment still is that Game 7 when he had 30 points hitting a bunch of threes in the bubble. But we're coming up on now a year and a half and a total of 621 attempts in which he's shooting well over 49%. He was 39% last year, 42.7 as I mentioned this year. And I do think if you run him off the line, he's still going to make bad decisions. He's not going to finish. Like, that is a weakness of his game. But like, he had this relocation 3 in this game where he pump faked. Like, he started to add that move as well. Now he's up to 6.9 3-point attempts per 36, and which is, that's a very solid number for essentially small forward, which is what he plays. He is a really, really important piece of what they do.
And especially with some of his struggles last year in the playoffs, I wondered about whether the Thunder could benefit from upgrading. And I mean, if they could really do it, then there's certainly, you could get a player who you trust a little bit more on offense. But this jump shot, you do have to pretty much believe it at this point. As you mentioned, the volume there, it's like basically it's over 600 over the last 2 years. And while he had some issues in the playoffs, he shot 39% from 3 in the playoffs last year as well. Like that wasn't the problem. It was the inside the arc stuff where he was even worse in the playoffs last year. He was below 30% than he was so far this year. One other thing briefly to flag with Lou Dort, I hadn't remembered this, but I was looking at Basketball Reference for him anyway. He's taken 37 free throws on the year in basically 1,200 minutes of play. That is a way lower free throw attempt rate than before. It was low, but it's just, that is a little bit interesting. But the other thing is, you kind of don't want Lou Dort getting free throws, because that means he has the ball inside the arc and he sucks inside the arc. So you probably, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's just, that is a really low number.
Yeah, a couple other things from Dallas as we shift to them a little bit. They're 23-19, 3-4 since we last checked in. Of course, they did at least get Kyrie back there. 8th in net rating, though, plus 4.1. 7th on offense, 10th on defense. And the offense was finally becoming what we thought it could be in this Luka era. I mean, it was great in like the early part of the time that they were that they first started competing, but these last couple of years it hasn't been as amazing. It's really been more that he's closed games for them, but their defense has also been awesome. But yeah, now it's taken a step back in his absence since Christmas, but still 7th on offense, 10th on defense, and project for 46-36, the 6th seed, 91% chance of making the playoffs. You mentioned some of their injury issues. Jaden Hardy only played 1 game in this one. He's not going to play against Charlotte tomorrow. I thought one thing that was encouraging for Dallas, 3 of 5 for Najee Marshall from 3. He really has not been taking them this year, so that's good to see that he was taking a few more. I think that will come into play potentially in the playoffs, because they are going to need him, I think, against some of the best scorers, unless PJ Washington maybe can handle some of the bigger forwards, but I think Marshall is going to be needed if it's more of a quick guy. Anything interesting here for let's see. Yeah.
Well,
What else you got?
I should talk about Kyrie a little bit. I mean, so
Yeah.
I thought this was going to be more of a kind of like ball dominant Kyrie performance, and he did. It was more fits and starts. Maybe that's the back issue lingering a little bit. Like, so he had a few moments where he's just absolutely fantastic, and then at other moments where it was Dinwiddie or it was somebody else that was really kind of primary, was really running things. There was actually a little bit of activity from Grimes at one point, but he still, like, when Kyrie went, he did very well. 25 points, 9 of 19 from the field. Also didn't turn the ball over that much. And so, as I mentioned, they didn't blitz him as much, but Kyrie, he did what they needed. The Mavs were much better offensively when he was on the floor. And especially against this iteration of the Thunder, that was more than enough. So I didn't think it was the best Kyrie performance I've ever seen, but especially when you consider some of the surrounding talent, some of the available talent, I thought he did the lift that he needed, which I thought was pretty fascinating. And then one other thing I wanted to flag. Well, first of all, there was a play where Klay Thompson stole a J-Dub outlet pass and passed it to Kyrie for a three. And I was thinking about how many possessions in his career Klay Thompson got both a steal and an assist. Those are two things that he doesn't always do. But so I wanted to look, because Klay was really a small factor in this win. You thought, maybe with some of the guys out that he would be. Only took 7 shots in 24 minutes, only played 24 minutes, and that wasn't foul trouble or anything else. And so his full season, I'm not going to do a whole breakdown of him. Career low usage, 21.4 basketball reference, and true shooting at 55, which is close to a career low. And if you remember the early career Klay, that was a very different player than what he became, even though he was always a good shooter. And it's not because the threes are not falling. Klay, 38% on 10 per 36. That is completely respectable. Slightly lower attempt rate than last year, but not crazy. But under 50% on twos, and somehow he's never gotten to the line. He's getting to the line even less. And so I still think that Klay has an important part to play for the Mavericks, in part because they don't really have a replacement, unless you want to count Quentin Grimes. Grimes does things a little bit differently. But if year one of the Klay Thompson experience ends up kind of being this kind of season, then the subsequent years might not be fantastic.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what it looks like when Luka comes back and that he's playing at the height of his powers and they can actually get a rhythm. And like, I don't think they're going to run a ton of plays for Klay, but also just to have someone that the defense is not going to leave. Maybe it'll be a situation where his individual efficiency is not awesome. I don't know what he can do inside the arc to change that, but he's at least getting up enough threes, and their offense looks pretty good with him out there because he's the best shooter, obviously, that they've had in the Luka era. Anything else here, or shall we move to Friday's other awesome tilt?
Mm-hmm. Friday's other close tilt. Let's go to the Pels Jazz game, the battle for the Jazz name. No, that's not what was on the line, unfortunately. New Orleans, I want to talk big picture for them a second before we get to the game. They're now 11-32, 5-3 since the last 15-60. They're better than negative 10.
That's actually 5-3. Yeah, that's like.
Oh, I want to talk about that. So their negative 9.7 net rating is 29th in the league, 26th on offense, 29th on defense. They're now projected to have the second worst record in the West with 26 wins. They're not making the playoffs, of course. Okay, this is a wild stat, Nate. The Pelicans are 6-4 in their last 10. Of the 10 worst records in the NBA, no other team is better than 3-7. That 10 worst records includes the Spurs, Bulls, and Sixers. Includes teams that are actively trying. And so the Pelicans in those last games, they've moved from basically like right neck and neck with the Wizards to already they have the 5th fewest wins in the league. And so they're ahead, quote unquote, in the loss column, but you like to think about the win column for bad teams, actually, because they can make up the losses. And so they've done well enough in this stretch. And yes, it's because they've gotten some of their dudes back. And we'll talk about that in the context of this game. They might have already screwed their draft position unless they get lucky in the lottery. And I think it's only going to get more extreme from here, because now they're only 3 wins behind / ahead of the Nets, who have already taken their foot off the gas pedal, and some of these other teams. So that's one big thing. And then I want to briefly throw a little nugget out there. We're not doing Sixers news right now. The Pelicans being this viable, this feisty, that changes the math a little bit if this season goes really off the rails for Philly. Because remember, it's all about the 5th worst record. Now that might get a little bit more into play. Anyway, just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, because Philly, of course, top 6 protected pick to OKC. And yeah, Pels, they're did you do their full stats already?
No, I should. No, I did.
Okay. So this game against Utah was pretty interesting. Zion Williamson was not really that involved as the Pels went out to a 42-22 lead after one because he had 3 fouls in the first quarter. And he ended up getting extremely upset with the referees. He finished with 24 points in 23 minutes on 21 field goal attempts, but he really did little in the first half. And Drew Eubanks started for Utah. Utah just had everybody out with Markkanen. John Collins is still out for them. Walker Kessler didn't play. So their bigs, Micah Potter even, I don't know if he's hurt or whatever. So their bigs were Drew Eubanks and Oscar Tshiebwe, who is famous for not being a good enough NBA prospect to forgo NAL money at Kentucky and go into the draft. And then they played a little bit of Kyle Filipowski, who was awful defensively in this game. So awful enough that they went with Tshiebwe. But Drew Eubanks was the big highlight was in the fourth quarter. Zion, after an offensive rebound or a turnover, comes down the lane and plants like a huge 2-handed dunk. But Zion was 11-21 from the field, and he certainly wasn't shooting outside of the immediate basket area. And so he just like kept trying to go through the chest of Drew Eubanks and just getting stopped. And then he finally was able to start showing a little bit more craft and beating him late third, early fourth. This game was like quasi-competitive. Utah got back into it in the second, but the Pels were up by 15 points for most of the second half. But yeah, like Zion was just like, yeah, I'm going to just jump into Drew Eubanks' chest and hope that they call a foul, and they never did. And finally, he just screamed at the referee. He was like, God damn it. And he just like, it was like your most obvious technical you're going to get. And he did get a couple of foul calls after that. It was only 2 of 5 to the line, but he really then started attacking with a little more craft. I mean, it seemed like he was playing hard already. He had 8 offensive rebounds. A lot of his misses in the first were off offensive rebounds that he just wasn't able to put back.
By the way, the Pelicans had 21 individually credited offensive rebounds in this game.
Yeah, well, when the Jazz, the only player who's like bigger than a shooting guard that they were playing other than their centers was Cody Williams. So
Cody Williams, who is so thin that like I don't even know the right analogy for it. Like gust of wind.
Yeah, like he'll have a flash or two every game, but he also is just 0 for 2 from the field, negative 31 in 18 minutes. He started at the 4. I mean, he is just really, really bad. Like just there was one play where there was a missed shot. Might have been a turnover, but he's right next to Trey Murphy and then just jogs back. Trey Murphy runs right past him for an alley-oop dunk. But there's a couple of plays where like guys tried to go right at him and he showed off that 7'1" wingspan. You're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But yeah, so back to Zion. I mean, it was like a little bit depressing at first, even as the Pels are blowing them out, to just see him like trying to go through Drew Eubanks. He's a good player as just like a straight up rim protector right at the basket. And he had 4 block shots in this game. But it was just like Zion, he can't score on this guy. Like Drew Eubanks is just like waiting back there under the rim, and Zion was just like jumping right into his chest and then missing or getting it blocked. I did think Zion was pretty good defensively. He had 3 block shots in this game. A couple of them were actually on the perimeter. And one of the big themes, especially when he was in foul trouble, was that he was switching on to some of these Jazz guards, mostly Sexton and Isaiah Collier. And Collier was actually the next thing I wanted to talk about. like he has something. I mean, that's always been the case as soon as from when I saw him at the Hoop Summit. And even just watching a little bit of film, I know you watched more of him. He was the 29th pick, came over in the Ochai Agbaji Olynyk trade to Toronto. And like, he's really quick and his handle is really good. I know he has this astronomical turnover rate this year. That was not a major problem for him in this one. It only had 2. But, you know, someone like Jose Alvarado is like trying to pressure him up, and Isaiah Collier is just like, no, you're not going to do that to me. Like, my handle's too good. I'm too quick. Like, it's just, he was completely unbothered by it. Like, he definitely is a guy who just has like a lot of reps and like really knows the point guard position. And yeah, he's had a lot of turnovers, and part of that is because he can't score at all, as we'll get to. But he had 11 assists in this one and was +8. They ended up playing him 35 minutes, and pretty good to be +8 in a game that your team lost by 13. And they went to him basically immediately in both halves and then didn't take him out. But like some of his passes just to like guys along the baseline, he was finding beautiful windows off of his drives to like big men who are trailing the play a little bit or out of pick and roll. He also was getting by guys. Like now they probably should have backed off him a little bit more, but like his handle is good. He's really quick, but he finished better in that game against the Nets when he had 21 points and also the hilarious 8-second violation. So like, you know, I don't know that he's like necessarily the smartest player, but he also is just like has a lot of these natural point guard skills. So the 11 assists for him and 7 rebounds, and he was really good in transition too, but 3 of 10, 0 for 1 from 3, and like some of these finishes just had no craft. There was one play that was hilarious. It was he goes to the basket, fires up a little like floater layup, and from the sideline camera, it's like, oh, this is an obvious goal. Can Karla Makovic even got some playing time, 4 minutes for the Pels, and I was like, oh, that's an obvious goaltend. And the Pels challenged. I'm like, what are they doing? And then they showed the on top of the basket camera, and Isaiah Collier was just going to airball this layup by like 5 feet. And so that's why, like, so Makovic blocked it away, and everyone's like, oh yeah, it was on its way down. And then they challenged it.
Oh,
it's
it
like,
wasn't,
oh no, this had no chance to go in whatsoever.
Well, I mean, so the analogy, I was thinking about this a little bit ago. I'd like to go back to what I said at the time, was like the intrigue for Collier. It's sort of like, I use J.R. Smith as a prospect a fair amount for people, because it's like, I think people forget how good he was as an athletic talent, and like the idea that if you ran it back, and the idea is basically somebody with Collier's physical gifts might not figure it out, but it's worth rolling those dice to see if he does, because the player that could result is so much better than like a less physically talented guy who does all of those things correctly, because it's just, they're these like low ceiling, high floor guys. And so like, I thought he was underdrafted, and even with like some of the problems that he's had this year, I still believe that to be true.
Yeah, I mean, if he just needs to figure out a way to be even remotely, like, he's shooting terrible from the line too. And I'm like, this was not a good Pels rim protecting group that was out there. They started Tice because Yves Missi was out in this game. And so, but like, if he could just figure out a way to score, like even defensively, I thought like he's got pretty good tools there.
I agree.
And to maybe be someone who can get into the ball. So it was just like, he was throwing some passes where I was just like, whoa, okay. Like this is like, he's getting in the lane and like making the right decision, like getting guys layups on a team that was, pretty limited. Svi Mihaliuk was a big focus of the offense for the Jazz. A lot of just running him off ball, gunning. Like, he actually is a little bit stouter than maybe your average shooting guard defensively. He's bulked up a little bit. His shooting has always been a little bit aggressive. He, of course, won a championship last year with Boston, though he figured little. But he's been an interesting guy. Obviously, he's been better than some of the guys that they've trotted out there at the 3 this season, or even the 2 at times. Keontae George was back. I know you want to do more of a breakdown on him next time. I thought his defense, and some of the numbers on his defense are terrible too. His defense in this game was atrocious. Like, he was giving up all kinds of just back cuts, totally losing guys. What were you going to say?
Well, since it's relevant to this, he is dead last in defensive EPM right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the numbers I was referring to. I mean, there was one play where he's guarding Jordan Hawkins. Probably someone you need to pay attention to, right? Like movement shooter. I thought Hawkins, he's still like, when the ball goes in for him, you're just like, oh, this guy is pretty good. Now, when Jordan Hawkins is trying to guard Colin Sexton and Colin Sexton just goes right through him like he's tissue paper for a layup, you don't feel as good about it. But so this play, Keontae George is guarding Jordan Hawkins, and Jordan Hawkins in the weak side corner. Jordan Hawkins runs all the way to the strong side corner and basically is taking the shot by the time Keontae George even realizes that he's moved. And yeah, there are a bunch of times where he didn't get back on defense and like just got beat for back cuts. It was just really, really ugly stuff from George. Who, like, he looked big and athletic out there. I know he's just coming back from injury, and like he has the physical tools to be a decent defender. But yeah, just what a disappointing year for him, just in terms of his general competitiveness. And like, even with guys like Jordan Clarkson out and Lowry out, like he got completely outplayed by Carl. He got outplayed by Elijah Harkless in this game. I think is on a two-way.
Can I give a stat that I think you'll find interesting? So I just happen to have this up. Of players who are really in an NBA rotation, and again, it's not gospel, drink. This game featured the 3 lowest overall EPMs in the NBA. Cody Williams, -6.9. Isaiah Collier, -6. Jordan Hawkins, -4.9. And the 4th place is someone we just talked about, Bub Carrington, -4.6.
Yeah. Couple other things. Trey Murphy, I mentioned when Herb Jones went down. We haven't gotten an official designation on him, whether he had surgery. He was on the bench in this game. But Trey, just as any kind of a stopper, is just not going to cut it. Like Elijah Harkless went right through him for a layup. Elijah Harkless is sort of like a try-hard, small combo guard who can't really shoot or anything. Like he just like dribbled right past him. Another play where Trey just like gave up a couple of back cuts, and just anytime someone went at him, they really got pretty good stuff. And again, I think like Murphy can make some plays on the backside with his length, but asking him to, I mean, this is not exactly a star-studded group the Jazz were putting out there. And Murphy was like, he had a bad defensive game. Giving up a $123 to this version of the Jazz is pretty ugly, but it's still just, that's what it's going to be for the Pels. Despite this 5-3 stretch, a lot of which came with Herb Jones, is just they don't have any threes. Like Trey Murphy's their only 3, and Zion is their only 4, essentially. I mean, they're not even playing Javonte Green that much. So it's all, they're playing lineups with like CJ and DeJounte Murray, and then like they bring in Jordan Hawkins to play the 3, which is not going to work. CJ had a great start. He's 5 of 5 from 3. The Pels made 9 of their first 12 from downtown to go out to that big lead, a team that has not shot it well. They've been shooting more threes of late, though. I thought it was also interesting.
They got 50 up in this one.
Yeah. Jazz will allow you to do that with this group. I thought it was also interesting that Zion, not a ton of points. Zion, really his best stretches were with that in the second half. They tried to kind of post him up, a little quick duck in, but that just wasn't working as well when he was being guarded by a center. I think that's about all I got here on this one.
We should do the Jazz stats actually, because we never did them.
I guess we have to.
They're not fantastic. 10-30 on the season, 3-5 since the last 15-60. Their -6.5 net rating is 25th in the league, 20th on offense, 27th on defense, and they are the team that is projected now to have the worst record in the West, 23-59.
Let's do a couple more here. Where we go next?
Let's see. What do I feel like? Let's go to Phoenix.
21-20. Oh, they're on a roll, baby. 6-3 since we last checked in on them. The first Nick Richards game was a big one. He had over 20 points, but they're still -1.2 net rating, 18th in the league. 11th on offense. That's been the big disappointment for them. And 24th on defense. Oh, wait, that's also quite disappointing. They project for a tie with the Warriors, actually, at 41-41 at the 8th seed, and 35% chance of making the playoffs. And the Jusuf Nurkic saga has been a little bit weird. He tested positive for the flu. He was away from the team. Bud said that he's turned the corner as a recovery, might rejoin the team during its current road trip. But he also was out of the rotation. Was that because he had the flu? Was that punishment? Like, remember, he got suspended too, 3 games for his role in the Marshall fracas, and then didn't really get back into things, and then he was sick. So we'll see. But of course, they did get Nick Richards, and so they're going to play against Cleveland on Monday. That'll be interesting. And then Brooklyn before they come back. And how did it look defensively with Nurkic?
Well, so what inspired me to look at the Suns defense with and without Nurkic was I watched a fair amount of Suns Hawks last week, and their defense to me, like possession to possession, was absolutely atrocious. And so I'm just like, well, is this really Nurkic being off the floor? And so when Jusuf Nurkic was available for the Suns, they had a 117.1 clean the glass defensive rating in his minutes. And that's actually worse than it is when Nurkic is off the floor. And it's worse than the Suns have been since Nurkic's last start. So all of the minutes since his last game, and then all of the Nurkic off minutes over the full season. But there is an important caveat in that, which is Suns opponents shot 40% on threes when Nurkic was on the floor, and that's 35% or even worse, depending on which splits we're doing when he's off. And so I that is a big part of the story. I mean, when Nurkic was on the floor, the Suns were a great defensive rebounding team, and that's basically the only time that's been the case. But there are some other trade-offs, in terms of forcing turnovers and all that kind of stuff. Like when Nurkic was on the floor, Bud did some of the more hardcore Bud stuff of like not going after turnovers and all that type of stuff. But so that's one part of it. So I firmly believe that the Suns defense was better when Nurkic was on the floor. But something that I found really interesting is that when I was going through the different splits, is that the Suns actually have been pretty effective protecting the rim in the game since Nurkic went out of the rotation. And that hasn't been true over the full sample. So overall, in the non-Nurkic minutes, opponents are shooting 66% the rim, but that's down to 61.5 in this last stretch. They've been very good defensively overall in terms of that kind of stuff. They're number 3 in terms of opponent rim percentage during this stretch. It's part of why they're 5-5. But so the core question, I mean, Nick Richards getting in changes the rotation is, do I think they're better off defensively without Nurk? No, I actively don't. But I will acknowledge the possibility that as bad as they were against the Hawks, that maybe the truth is closer to they don't miss him as much as I thought.
Yeah, and I think Nick Richards, I got asked today on Twitter about, because John and I talked like, this is kind of a depressing trade for the Suns. They give up 3 seconds, get back 1 worse second, and also get Nick Richards and save some money, and like that's the level they've been reduced to. And obviously Richards was great in the first game, which I didn't watch, but I think maybe there's a possibility that he could do more, that he was just on this sinking ship in Charlotte, and he can get up. I mean, he is a voracious offensive rebounder, and having someone who can really get up for an alley-oop might help them. Just some like their bigs just don't really finish around the basket very well, and like they don't. I thought Nurkic served an important purpose in like helping them change sides of the floor and sort of run stuff through and like lay the wood on a screen. But it's possible to me that Nick Richards could be better than anyone that they've had there. I'm sure they traded for him with the idea that would be the case. And then also the other thing that it enables potentially is that they could move Nurkic and still have somebody else. And they obviously seem to think that Nurkic was terrible this year. What about Devin Booker? The consensus has been that he hasn't been that good this year. You dug into that a little bit more.
I did. And because he had a couple of just brutal games, as we discussed, kind of as a part of gamers that we didn't focus on the Suns over the last couple weeks. Booker's overall stats aren't actually that much worse. So last year, 61% true shooting on 30 usage. The year before, 60% on 32. That's now 59% true shooting on 29 usage. So a little bit worse in each of those. But the reason I think, so you and I have both talked about how we think he's been disappointing. I think the reason isn't as much those stats, because when you're a large part of the offense, it's, we talked about this a lot in MVP and All NBA. It's how is the offense when you're on the floor. And so while Booker's individual efficiency is not significantly down, the Suns have had an offensive rating during his minutes of 121 or better each of the last 2 seasons. And there's been a significant on-off split. Remember, the Booker on, Kevin Durant off minutes were actually really good last year. That was a strong part of Booker's All-NBA case. That isn't as strong this year. So that 121 plus is down to 116.7. And the differential has almost halved. So last year it was an 8.4 margin from him being on to being off. That's now 4.3. So I think that those are more important than Booker's individual efficiency. But it is interesting that those aren't that different, and that things like offensive EPM don't think of this as big of a downgrade as maybe we've discussed it being, though I still believe that it is.
Yeah, here are your Devin Booker on-court offensive ratings for the last 4 seasons before this one. 24 was 121.4. That was one of the reasons why I felt that the Suns might actually do something in the playoffs, because they had this amazing offense when all their big three were available, particularly when Booker was out there. That, of course, then they ran into the Wolves defense. And then in 22-23, that was the year they really didn't have much of KD until the end of that season. And right. So it was more just that same old cast from 22 and 21, 121 that season, 22, 119.5, and then 21, 120.1. So basically,
and those early ones,
there, yeah.
Those early season ones, those were in a lower offense environment too. So like those are really good.
Yeah, I mean 21 was pretty high. I can't remember exactly. I guess this last year was crazy high. But yeah, so he is, and there are, of course, as you mentioned, really big improvements every year when he was on the floor. So yeah, that is a little bit of a difference from this year, but he has been in and out of the lineup and injured, and let's see if they can get rolling a little bit here and now. All right, so I'll give you the choice here for our last one. Do you?
I know which one I want to do.
Okay, what is it?
Kings. Because of the coaching change and everything else, are you cool with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's do it.
The Sacramento Kings this is why they're 22 and 20, but 7-1 since the last 15 and 60. Their plus 2.4 net rating is 12th in the league. They're 9th on offense, 13th on defense, and they're another team projected to win 41 games. So in this morass. And good news for the Kings, I worried about Keon Ellis's sprained right ankle, which happened against the Rockets in the game we discussed as a gamer. He played on Sunday against the Wizards, so it wasn't serious. So that's very good for them. They can kind of maintain the dudes that were in the rotation, and they were able to win that game against the Wizards comfortably, 123-110. Or sorry, 123-100, not 110.
Yeah, that was the second night of a back-to-back for the Wiz, and so wanted to take a look at what had changed under Doug Christie vis-a-vis Mike Brown. Looked at this before the Wizards game, but I'll try to give you the updated stats here. They are actually a plus 6.2 net rating. They blew out the Wizards, which is, they have not had that many blowout wins in this stretch. Before this, it was plus 4.2, plus 4.6, excuse me. And the defense after playing the Wizards is up to 8th. It was in the teens before that, but they're pretty close. Their offense actually went down a little bit, but they're pretty close in terms of offense and defense to where they were under Mike Brown. Nothing really standing out in terms of their defense, which is technically 8th. I didn't include that first game against the Lakers on the day that Mike Brown was fired in this sample because I figure Doug Christie wasn't the guy who ran practice there. So that was the one thing that's sticking out here is that they are number 1 in defensive rebounding by a mile. Sabonis, that's the one thing that he probably doesn't get enough credit for on the defensive end. And the other thing that really sticks out about their defense that I looked at was that they are awesome in transition defense. I was like, oh, maybe that's something that Doug Christie can, that's something maybe that a coach can control. They're basically right at the top of the league under Mike Brown in that as well. Well, the defense being better, maybe it's just because they're getting lucky from three. No, they're actually giving up 39% from three. It's really the other factors where they've been good enough. And I mean, it's not like this 8th number is some amazing number.
Yeah, and I think the Kings have been pretty unlucky on opponents shooting the last couple of years, if memory serves. I think they were last year too.
Yeah. So I also wanted to look at, maybe they're distributing plays a little bit differently, right? I mean, we talked about them pretty extensively on Thursday, probably for like a half hour actually, in context of that game against the Rockets that they won. And really the only thing that's changed, like Sabonis's usage is actually down slightly from like 21 to 19. Monk's is up, but that is really basically because Fox missed 3 games. DeRozan's right about the same. He's in the mid 20s. Fox is down slightly from but part of that too is just because they're starting Monk, but Monk was already starting under Mike Brown as well. Another thing that was pointed out in the Sam Van Gundy said this, that the Doug Christie's trying to get him to run more. They probably had a meeting with him or something beforehand, but no, they're still pretty middling before the Wizards game. They're like 14th in percentage of transition possessions under Doug Christie. So that's not really changed much either. So how on earth, Danny, could they be 9-2? Now, part of that is because they just killed the Wizards in this one. So part of my thesis has gone away somewhat. But how is it that they managed to win all these games without having really changed very much?
Well, I mean, it's something that came up a little bit as we kind of discussed Mike Brown getting fired, is that this team that has 2 of the best clutch performers over the last couple of years had severely underperformed their point differential. And a lot of that was clutch foibles. And that isn't happening anymore. I mean, so in their last 10 games, the Kings have played 5 close games, so 5 within the last 5 minutes. They've won all 5 of those games and have a clutch net rating of plus 48.4.
Yeah, and they were 6-13 in clutch games before Doug Christie took over. Hilarious, they somehow had a positive net rating in the clutch and just a lot of really poorly timed collapses, like say fouling a 3-point shooter for a 4-point play up 3.
That would never happen.
But yeah, I mean, and opponents in this stretch are shooting 33% from the field, 64% from the line, and 29% from 3 in the clutch games that they've played. So there's your difference really so far. We'll see whether that holds. Certainly, I think there's been at least somewhat of an attitude change. Would that have happened with Mike Brown if they had held on to him? Maybe not. Maybe these collapses became a self-fulfilling prophecy. But it was one of those things where they were always going to play better whether they fired Mike Brown or not. Now, were they going to go 5-0 immediately in clutch games? Like, that's not how regression to the mean works. It's regression to the mean going forward, not regression to the mean based on what has already happened. The future doesn't know what's happened in the past with respect to randomness. But not a ton that you can look at here. I mean, even like the offense too. They're shooting 37% from 3. They're still 28th in location, field goal percentage. Again, and part of that is the Golden One Center accounting, where
a lot of that is.
Yeah, but also they're taking a ton of mid-rangers. Fox takes them. Obviously, DeRozan takes a bunch of them as well. The second most long mid-rangers outside of the paint in the league since Christie took over. So, yeah, nothing really has changed so far for the Kings other than the clutch performance. Like, I was shocked. I thought it would be like, oh, maybe there's like some shooting luck, and it's like it's not even that. Like, there's no shooting luck really either direction. It's been like it's like surprisingly small over any 10-game sample. You expect that some number in terms of jump shooting is going to be off on either offense or defense. Like neither of them are. It's just it's entirely the clutch performance. That's the only thing I could find. I felt like, because a lot of times you go through this research process, take you guys behind the curtain a little bit. I try to like look for the answers, and usually through my process, I'll find something in like 10 or 15 minutes. I was like, nope, not that. Nope, not that. Nope, not that. Nope, not that. I mean, I assume there's going to be some clutch difference, but I was like, oh, there's got to be something else. Oh, there's literally nothing. Like, oh, they're playing at the same pace. They're rebounding the same. Like, they're giving up the same quality shots. They're getting the same quality shots.
They haven't changed the starting lineup.
Nothing.
You know, all that kind
of. Yeah. There's no difference. It's hilarious. All right. I think we can probably pack it in here, and we'll get to the rest of it. He's got a lot of cool stuff. Tomorrow we got to talk that Spurs Grizzlies game, the one that Ja and Wembanyama played in. Yes, that dunk did not count. It was after the whistle.
Ooh.
Stop talking about it. And I wanted to talk about Jalen Green, who might be the most discussed person, Danny, that we, in terms of like per season 15 and 60 breakdowns that we've ever done. Because he'll always have these flashes like, oh, maybe he's turning the corner now. Like we went to last March too. And I also wanted to look at Jeremy Grant's defense to see if he gets traded. Like, what would a team be getting there? So we got a lot of interesting stuff to talk about in our next episode, which will be tomorrow night. And I also want to remind everyone on the free feed to go ahead and subscribe to Dunc'd Prime, because the mock trade deadline is coming up, hopefully within about 10 days or so. And that is our signature episode. Only the first part of it will be available for free. And so let me just make sure that I get the code right for you guys. What's the, how do I not remember that? I want to make sure that I actually give you guys the right one. So bear with me, because this is important information. But I will tell you that you get 35% off a yearly membership. And boy, still it's not there. All right, almost there. Load. Yes, mock off season 25, which is what I thought it was, but I wanted to double check. Mock off season 25 is that code to get 35% off a yearly membership. If you're willing to commit to us, we will give you a awesome discount. So please consider checking that out. Link to that is in the show notes. Talk to y'all tomorrow.